Dr. Andrea Gilli, Dr. Mauro Gilli, and dear participants, very good afternoon and welcome to NICE webinar on why China has not caught up yet in military technology. Nepal Institute for International Cooperation and Engagement is an independent, apolitical, and non-partisan think tank which believes in freedom, democracy, and a world free from conflict. We envision a world where sources of insecurity are identified and understood, conflicts are prevented or resolved, and peace is advocated. China Studies is a major research center at NICE. China Studies as a whole brings into perspective the rising powers mounting economic, military, and diplomatic cloud that certainly has the aptitude to either overturn or sustain the current contemporary world order. The center broadly examines China's international strategy, thinking, and conduct, foreign and security policy, and the impact of domestic politics and economy on China's foreign relations. It further addresses China's emergence in the face of the world in flux, domestic politics, economy, society, culture, People's Liberation Army, and Tibetan Autonomous Region, and most importantly, her engagement with each of South Asian countries. At the time when China is seen very assertive, it is interesting to look at China's military technology. To talk on this interesting topic, we have invited Dr. Andrea Gilli and Dr. Mauro Gilli. On behalf of NICE, I'd like to invite both of you at today's webinar. Dr. Andrea Gilli is a senior researcher in military technology at the NATO Defense College in Rome, Italy. He holds a PhD in political and social science from European University Institute in Florence and was a visiting and postdoctoral fellow at SAIS-Johns Hopkins University and Columbia Universities, as well as Stanford University and Harvard University, respectively. Andrea has provided consulting services to both private and public organizations, including the Office of Net Assessment of the US Department of Defense, the European Union Military Committee, the Italian Air and others, Italian Air Force and Italian government. His research has been published in International Security Studies, Journal of Strategic Study, RUSI Journal, and has received coverage in The Economist, The Washington Post, Foreign Policy, The Diplomat, and others. Similarly, the other speaker is Dr. Mauro Gilli. Dr. Mauro Gilli is a senior researcher in military technology and international security at the Center of Security Studies of the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Zurich. He holds a PhD in political science from Northwestern University and was a postdoctoral fellow at the Dickey Center of Dartmouth College. He has provided consulting service to both private and public organizations, including the Office of Net Assessment of the US Department of Defense. His research has been published in International Security Studies, Journal of Strategic Studies, Social Science, Quarterly, and PLOS One, and has received coverage in The Economist, The Washington Post, Foreign Policy, The Diplomat, and others. First of all, I'd like to request Dr. Andrea to make his remarks in 15-20 minutes, which will be followed by Dr. Mauro. They can also interchange if they are willing to. I'd like to request all our participants to drop their questions in the chat box or on the Facebook Live. Thank you very much. Dr. Andrea, the floor is yours.
Thank you for the kind introduction and for the invitation. Actually, we're going the opposite way. So Mauro is starting first and I'm with the PowerPoints and I'm picking up during his presentation. So Mauro, please.
Thank you very much again for the kind invitation. We are extremely happy to have this opportunity to present. We haven't had any chance to present to any Asian country and to Nepal in particular before. So this is a really welcome opportunity. Let me share my so what we are going to present is the research that was published 1 year ago in the Journal International Security. This is a project that has taken about 10 years of work. So any comment or feedback by those attending the meeting are more than welcome. And this is co-authored by me and my brother, Andrea. Sorry. Okay, and so this is the article. The starting point of the research comes from these, observing these two key factors. About 100 years ago, the United Kingdom commissioned Dreadnought, which was a capital ship that, because of its capabilities, suddenly made all existing battleships of other navies obsolete. However, in just a span of a couple of years, Germany managed to replicate this technology, thus essentially canceling the the advantage and the benefits that this technology provided the United Kingdom. This analogy is particularly important when we think about events nowadays, and namely with particular attention to the F-22, which is the most advanced jet fighter in the world, which was commissioned by the United States 15 years ago. And also the F-25, the F-22, because of its capabilities, suddenly made all existing jet fighters obsolete. And yet, in a couple of years, China came up with these advanced jet fighter. And so many observers, analysts, and policymakers started wondering whether what we are observing is essentially a repetition of what we saw in the past. Namely, a rising power manages in a very short time to copy one of the most advanced weapon systems in the world. And these two cases essentially provide, give us the possibility to ask much broader questions, namely whether China has closed the military technological gap with the United States, and whether, more generally, countries can easily imitate the most advanced weapon system of the United States. And in particular, whether opportunities such as reverse engineering or cyber espionage facilitate and accelerate the process of technological convergence, or so-called catch-up. Some observers actually believe this is the case. Some observers do believe that reverse engineering and cyber espionage do provide a great advantage, and in fact that China has caught up. This is, for example, an article that came up in 2018 in The Economist that said not only China has caught up, it's already made it further advances in the technology that might put the US at a disadvantage in the near future. Well, what we argue is that the conventional wisdom that we hear in the media and among many academics ignores a key change that has happened over the past 150 years or 100 years, namely the dramatic increase in the complexity of military technology. And we can think in complexity by looking at several dimensions, such as the number of components of weapon systems, as well as the sophistication of individual components. When we think about materials, electronics, sensors, software code, and so forth. And third, a third dimension that captures the change in the complexity of military technology is provided by the environmental conditions in which the most advanced weapon systems can operate. So in terms of both properly environmental conditions, namely speed, altitude, or collapse depth for submarines, as well as the context of operation, namely the hostile environment that weapon systems such as stealth aircraft can operate in. Namely, context of operations in which enemies are extremely well armed and pose a significant threat to one's platform. Well, when we consider the increasing complexity, we realize that this increasing complexity has led to a massive change in the nature of innovation and imitation. Namely, while innovation 100 years ago mostly entailed conjectures and relatively simple ideas that were put to practice by companies that had sufficient long production runs. Nowadays, innovation entails much more work in terms of research and development and testing. So it is completely changed just the nature of production. And what we argue is that the change in production, the change in innovation has also led to a change in imitation. That is, imitating advanced weapon system is no longer as easy as it used to be. And this is our central claim. Why is this the case? So this is the main idea. So what we argue is that the advantage of imitation that countries such as Germany derived 100 years ago does not exist anymore. Why? Because 100 years ago, two conditions were at play. That is, countries could easily and quickly develop the capabilities required for innovation, namely the industrial capabilities. And second, the ideas behind a given weapon system could spread relatively easily and quickly. what we argue is that because of the increasing complexity, these two conditions do not apply anymore, and actually they have led to a situation in which the innovator has an advantage. There are two reasons. So on the one hand, the requirements, the industrial, technological, and scientific requirements for imitations have changed dramatically. Namely, 100 years ago, these requirements were relatively limited and generic. By limited, we mean that just the number of disciplinary domains that a country had to master were relatively limited. And mastering these domains entail relatively little effort, because most of these fields, from aerodynamics to propulsion to materials, were really at the infancy. Moreover, countries could exploit their commercial industrial base. Namely, by generic, we mean that countries didn't need to have specialized worker and facilities and so forth. They just could use what they already had. Conversely, today's, because of the increasing complexity, the requirements for imitation have become not only massive, but they also become extremely specific. By massive, we mean that the number of disciplinary domains have expanded dramatically. So weapon producer nowadays, a weapons producer of advanced weapon system, they need to master not only the discipline of the weapon system itself, but also, for example, the disciplines such as environmental science, maritime biology, or oceanography. At the same time, these requirements have also become extremely specific. By that, it means that we cannot simply use commercial companies to develop extremely advanced weapon systems, because commercial companies do not have the laboratory, testing facility, production facilities that we need to develop and produce the most advanced weapon systems. At the same time, also technological knowledge diffuses with much more problems than it used to be, which might sound counterintuitive, but this is actually the case. There are two reasons. So 100 years ago, knowledge could be relatively easy codified. That is, it could be written down in terms of general rules to follow. Moreover, this knowledge was relatively limited, such that one single individual or a couple of individuals could retain it, and in case bring it with them when they went to a different country. So this is the case, for example, of Tesla, who from Serbia went to the United States. But because of the increasing complexity, these two conditions do not hold anymore. Namely, the development of advanced weapon systems entail a lot of experience, that is, experience meaning a lot of hands-on work on different weapon systems, and experience is tacit. And by tacit, we mean that this knowledge cannot be written down in terms of general rules and laws that others can follow. Moreover, because knowledge has expanded to so many domains and to such depth, it cannot be retained anymore by single individuals. It is just too big for any single individual to retain. In fact, it is retained by teams of engineers, specialized workers, managers, and so forth. So even if one engineer or one specialized workers like kind of defects to another countries or travel to another country, he will be able to retain only a small fraction of the necessary knowledge for imitating advanced weapon systems. So what we do in our article is then to look at two cases to see whether there is evidence for the argument we have provided for this, how the increasing complexity has made imitation more difficult. And we look at the two cases we discussed before, that is Dreadnought and the F-22. So Dreadnought was this advanced big gun battleship that essentially put to practice the dictum by the Lord of the British Navy, that is, hit first, hit hard, and keep hitting. The F-22, because of its capabilities, can first look, first shot, first kill. Namely, can identify a target way before the target can identify the F-22, and can take a shot and kill the target way before being shot at. These two cases are particularly important for many reasons. First of all, the imitation of Dreadnought by Germany and the imitation of the F-22 by China are two cases of rising powers. So Wilhelmine Germany in the Belle Epoque, in the period just before World War I, and China from the late 1990s nowadays. So these are two rising powers with assertive foreign policy, two rising powers that have also benefited from the two greatest eras of globalization, the Belle Epoque before World War I, as well as the current age of globalization that has expanded dramatically after the end of the Cold War. And both countries have benefited tremendously from the expansion of their commercial companies. There are other reasons why comparing these two cases is particularly important. So on the one hand, Germany did not face two-landed threat. Namely, German investment in shipbuilding was somewhat limited because of the necessity to invest also in the land platform. Moreover, Germany faced bureaucratic opposition to investment in naval shipbuilding. For this reason, it could allocate only limited resources. And the Kaiser himself, the emperor of Germany, kept interfering with the design of advanced battleships. Germany also didn't really have a very advanced naval shipbuilding industrial base when it started developing the copy of Dreadnought, and it benefited from only very, very limited transfer of technology from other countries. So all its attempt to catch up in naval shipbuilding was mostly indigenous technology development. Conversely, the case of China displays the very opposite conditions. Namely, China since 1991 has not really faced any land threat, which means that it could give priority to both naval and aerospace technologies. The development of advanced jet fighters also became a political priority for the Chinese government. China has invested massively in defense over the past 20, 30 years. Moreover, it has promoted both merger and acquisitions as well as foreign direct investment from other countries in the commercial aerospace sector so as to maximize the amount of foreign technology it could absorb. And what we teach most extensively in espionage, whether traditional espionage, a lot of Chinese spies have been found working at key US defense companies from Wright Aerospace Lab to many others, as well as it has engaged in massive campaign of cyber espionage. Last but not least, China has been buying a lot of technology from Russia, both aircraft, engines, and radars, which it has tried to reverse engineer and to copy. And I'm going to stop here and I'll let Andrea keep on the discussion.
Okay, you have to, okay, great. So just to summarize briefly, our research started with a simple question. Where is China now with respect to military technology? Is China behind? Is China the same level of the United States? Is China ahead? And to answer this question, what we do as social scientists, political scientists, is just try to develop theories first, and that's what Mauro illustrated before, in which we basically argued that the complexity of military technology over the past 150 years has dramatically increased. And then what we do in the social sciences is test those theories and test them with cases, as Mauro just illustrated, which basically permit to give the highest confidence about our results. So what we did is say, okay, let's think at a case which is analogous right now to the competition between the United States and China. And that case comes from the early 20th century. Actually, it started slightly earlier, late 19th century, when Germany began a policy of naval rearmament. First was called the Weltpolitik, so a global policy which wanted to make Germany more similar to the other great powers. And then what happened next was that towards the late 19th century, Germany started basically investing more and more resources in the naval domain, to the point of basically challenging or raising some questions to Great Britain, which at the time with its Royal Navy was the leading naval power of the time. You may remember the entire 19th century was basically the rule Britannia with the Royal Navy ruling the waves. What happened that facing the dramatic increase in the number of warships that Germany was developing, Great Britain between 1904 and 1906 basically developed a very innovative concept. That concept is called Dreadnought. Was nowadays we could call it a revolutionary innovation, a disruptive innovation. The key idea is that the Royal Navy, building on the past 50 plus years of technological progress in metallurgy, in propulsion, in chemistry, in electricity, it basically moved from warships that were called battleships, which had several type of guns, to just one single platform called Dreadnought, in fact, which was mounting only long-range guns, which could, thanks to progress in propulsion, could go extremely fast, much faster than before. And the reason why it could basically fire at long range was because of progress in electricity permitted new fire control systems that ensure accuracy in the long range. As Mauro hinted at the very beginning, it was a naval revolution, which made basically obsolete all warships that were until then in service. What is interesting is just in only a matter of a few years, Germany could not only replicate this platform, but even outperform in some domain. So later in the around 1911, German battleships were actually faster, had superior accuracy, could basically achieve the same level of resistance when it comes to armor. So if they were fired at, they would basically resist enemy firepower much better, or with the more limited weight. And this was extremely impressive as a result, not only in when we think about the timing, it took literally a couple of years, but also because of the conditions to which Mauro hinted before, and I want to emphasize a few more. Basically, until the 1890s, so some 15 years before, the German Navy was headed by an army general. This means that basically Germany, until only 15 years later, paid very, very little attention to the naval domain. Similarly, when it came to shipbuilding, for political reasons, basically related to internal consensus, the German political establishment did not want to invest too much in new technologies. They did not want to make those battleships the most capable ever, because basically they would have become much more expensive, and by being more expensive, political opposition would have mounted. And as Mauro said, I mean, they knew about Dreadnought already a few years earlier than it was that entering service, but they basically neglected, and they kept developing the same type of warships for several months, if not a few years. And well, when we look at World War I, we have the best example of how good were German Dreadnought battleships, because at the Battle of Jutland in 1916, that is the main naval engagement of World War I, what we see is that the performance of the two warships were basically the same. If we look at the number of hits, at their performance in terms of speed, maneuverability, they perform very, very similar, and probably because of some issues that it's not worth discussing right now, but the German battleships were probably even superior. So when technological complexity, as our theory predicts, was lower over 100 years ago, imitating even the most advanced weapon systems of the time was relatively easy. But what has happened, as Mauro said before, is that since then, the complexity of military technology has increased dramatically. So if our theory holds, we should find that China struggled much more than Germany 100 years ago in imitating the J-20. And so I give the floor to Mauro.
Yeah, and so this is exactly what we want to test. We want to understand how easily could China replicate or imitate or adapt the most advanced US weapon system, that is the F-22, and produce an indigenous version. And this indigenous version is the one we have discussed before, the J-20. And by now we have some hints. Of course, our analysis stops at when we wrote the paper. So maybe things are going to change in the future. But with our article, we look at the past 15, 20 years of Chinese advancement in aerospace sector. And what we observe is that China has made amazing progress. So we don't want to dismiss this progress. It's really, really impressive. But despite this progress, still the Chinese stealth jet fighter suffers of some key liabilities that suggests, at least, that it is behind the F-22. What are these key liabilities? So first, is its stealth performance. So both on the front as well as on the rear, the J-20 has some features that we can observe that significantly increase the chances of detection by radar. What are these features? One is, which I'm pointing with the mouse, is the fact that the engines are round, that are axisymmetrical. That is, these engines are not covered as it happens in the F-22. I should have a picture. No, I don't have a picture, sorry. So these engines are exposed to incoming radar beams. Engines are a massive amount of metal, so they reflect radar wave in a massive way. So from the rear, the J-20 has an extremely poor performance in terms of stealth. Same is actually from the front. I mean, from the front, the performance is much better, but because the J-20 carries these two forward wings called canard, these two forward wings are entailed to enhance the maneuverability of the fighter. But the problem is that unless these wings are kept flat, as soon as they are moved, they are going to become something like a mirror that reflects frontal radar waves. And this increased significantly the radar reflection. So the only way for the J-20 to lower its radar reflection is to keep these wings flat, aligned with the other wings, but in this way they lose maneuverability. So this is in terms of stealth performance. Second is the engines themselves. So China has made massive efforts to copy extremely powerful jet engines that can produce what is called supercruise, that is flying at supersonic speed without the need of afterburners. Afterburners are extremely fuel inefficient because entail burning fuel after the combustion chamber. Well, China so far has still not been able to produce these engines. And according to reports from the Chinese Stock Exchange, there are speculation that China might start next year to produce some jet engines with these capabilities, but in an extremely slow number, something like 5 engines in a couple of years. And this is amazing because China on engines has really done an extremely impressive amount of copying, reverse engineering, and cyber espionage, which we can discuss later in the Q&A section. Last but not least, there is reason to believe that also in terms of avionics, that is the electronics that makes modern jet fighters extremely effective weapon systems. So as in terms of electronics, China has not caught up. How do we know? We know because according to some sources, China still has problems with developing the flight control software of the J-20. Now, the flight control software is actually the least demanding part of a jet fighter. The most demanding part is the so-called data fusion software, which is the software that fuses all the source, all the information provided by different sensors, such as the radar, the electronic sensor, the thermal sensors, fuses them together to identify automatically a multiplicity of targets, track them, and provide the pilots with the information such that the pilot can engage a target. So given that China struggled with the flight control software, we can speculate, we can conjecture that probably it has not been able to caught up with the US in terms of data fusion software. So someone might wonder whether the information of the J-20 we have is somehow biased or doesn't really, is not accurate, or whether it's only speculative. And I think this is a fair objection. So for this reason, we also have looked at other weapons program that China has tried to develop. And one is the, for example, the fourth generation aircraft fighter. So the J-11 is a replica of the Su-27, the Sukhoi 27 developed by Russia. This is considered by far the most advanced Chinese aircraft. In fact, China claims that it didn't copy the Russian version because its version is actually superior. Well, even for the J-11, so the problems with engines have been extremely long, and only over the past couple of years, China has allegedly managed to replicate the engines powering these aircraft that date back to the early 1980s. So it took almost 40 years for China to develop an extremely mature technology. Even more problematic is the naval version of this aircraft, the J-15, which in fact has suffered a lot of crashes and other problems, such that the Chinese military has decided, they started looking for a replacement. So this aircraft has had problems also with the flight control software itself, that has led China to decide to put it on the side. So the fact that China has had problems copying fourth generation aircraft fighter, meaning 30 to 40 years old technology, suggests that imitating technology today is not that easy, or at least is much more difficult than imitating state-of-the-art technology was 100 years ago. Last piece of information we look at is actually from the US itself. So we wonder, well, how hard would it be for a country that has the same capabilities of the United States? It has access to all the technical information the US possesses. How would it be difficult for such a country to reproduce the F-22? Well, we had this information because in 2009, the US military decided to interrupt the production of the F-22. And in 2017, the US military commission ran with a report to understand how difficult it would be to restart production. And the findings are sobering. So it would take almost 10 years for the United States to restart the production of the F-22. And it would take about 25% of the original cost to recreate all the industrial base. So if even for the United States, it takes 10 years and about 25% of the original production cost to restart the production of the F-22, we can conjecture that for countries that have a much less advanced industrial base and that have access to a much fewer information, it's going to be much more difficult. I can go with the conclusions, but I know I've already talked for long, so I don't know if you'd rather have us stop here and discuss some of the implications later, or whether you want us to discuss the conclusion.
Maybe you can
discuss
it. We can take 5-6 minutes more, maybe, because it will be more interesting.
Okay, sure. So how does, what does our article show? So we started from this very famous article by Barry Posen, who is a professor at MIT, who back in 2003 argued that the United States has the so-called command of the commons. That is, the United States own some of the most advanced weapon systems in the world, which together with other capabilities provided with some key advantages. What we try to understand is why, despite globalization, despite the communication revolution, despite instant communications, why no country has so far been able to replicate the most advanced US weapon systems. And with our paper, we try to do that. And what we what we show is that despite globalization, despite so-called dual-use technologies, jet engines are a case in point. That is, technologies that share a lot of components and sections with military technologies that share a lot of section components with commercial technologies, despite cyber espionage, despite all the opportunities China has had for reverse engineering. That is, the opportunity to access foreign technology, namely Russian technology, and try to copy it piece by piece. So despite all these factors, China has struggled tremendously. So I will stop here. And so if there are any questions, they are more than welcome. Thanks again for the opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Andrea and Dr. Mauro.
Sorry, there is a lot of noise.
Sorry, there are lots of questions, so we'll move to the questions directly. I'll stop the slide here.
Yeah.
How would you like to go? Like questions in a set of 3 or 1 by 1? How do you like?
Yeah, maybe stream some, because maybe there are some topics that are somehow related.
Okay. But it will be very difficult to club together because lots of questions scattered. There will be some on chat books, some are in Facebook and all, but we'll try to do that.
Do as you prefer.
Okay. First is, what are the PLA's ground force greatest strength and weaknesses in terms of equipment? In terms of equipment, what are the advantage and disadvantage of PLA ground force? Second is, what struggle has PLA been facing in the ways towards military modernization? And third is, according to Chinese President Xi Jinping, the PLA should give priority to building new type fighting capabilities, which is generally thought to be referred to boosting PLA's capabilities to engage in electronic, information, and space operations. So what is the ground forces role in this?
So we actually have not looked at ground forces. A key aspect when you think about warfare in general is that technology plays an extremely important role in air warfare, in naval warfare, but in land warfare, it plays a much less important role. This is the research by Professor Stephen Biddle at Columbia University has explained this aspect very in depth. The main reason is that in land warfare, as we have seen in Afghanistan as well as in Iraq, extremely well-trained soldiers can exploit natural or artificial obstacles to shield themselves from being detected and then create significant problems for opposing forces. So when it comes to land forces, I would say a kind of almost a irregular type of warfare provides any country with a massive advantage against an extremely advanced country like the United States, again, as we saw in Iraq and Afghanistan.
I would have something that probably, as Mauro said, we have not looked at Chinese ground forces in our research, but there are a couple of considerations that we're making. So the first is that provided that technology is an important enabler in ground war, but is not as important in air and naval warfare, ground forces need supplies. Now, China has extremely big, large borders. So a key constraint is basically the logistics. That basically means that to move all these forces, especially in not necessarily convenient terrain, is very, very demanding. The second aspect has to do about civil-military relations. That is basically that the effectiveness of any military force, but in particular probably land forces, is basically about command and control, which is about mutual trust among and coordination among the different parts of land forces, the artillery, the infantry, the armor, and so forth. And what we know is that it's just not easy to achieve. Mauro was correctly pointing that waging irregular warfare can be extremely effective against conventional forces, but if you want to invade a country, if you want to fight a conventional war, these aspects of coordination are just difficult. They cannot be built in relatively short time. So that would be just my addition to Mauro's comment.
And can you repeat the second question, because I didn't understand it the first time you.
Second question is, what struggle PLA has to face in terms of military modernization?
Oh, which I would say experience. Like, so the key aspect is I mean, we see in commercial sector as well, countries like Samsung or Apple, what they have is really, they've developed so much experience working with cutting edge technologies, and there's no substitute. So for China, as I said, has made tremendous progress. Like, I mean, it's really, really impressive, but there's no shortcut. There's no way to develop this experience. And actually, I don't remember the name, the manager of one of the company of a Chinese engine producing companies said it explicitly when he was asked about why China was proceeding so slowly with the development of an extremely advanced jet engines. His answer was, look, all countries that produce very advanced jet engines had to pursue to go through a given path, and we are pursuing that given path. So he said it himself, there is no shortcut. So that, I would say, this means that with time, China very likely is going to achieve, or possibly is going to achieve great things, but before that is going to be difficult. Yeah.
So I would like to add only something, because Mauro's answer mostly refers to technology, and I would point out to two other complementary aspects when it comes to military modernization. One is strategy. I mean, the current discussions are in a way very enthusiastic about the power of technology, which for two people who study military technology is great to hear. But we still have to understand that technology serves a strategy. And if you don't have a sound strategy, you just risk investing in the wrong platforms. And the example of Germany 100 years ago is pretty telling, because Germany back then was a country that was surrounded by potential land threats, mostly France and Russia. Great Britain had no interest in waging a war against Germany. The best strategy for Germany would have been basically to invest in land forces against these two possible enemies, and eventually develop submarines to neutralize the capabilities of the Royal Navy. Germany did exactly the opposite. It invested money in warships for a conventional naval fight that basically, with the exception of the Battle of Jutland, never occurred. In this way, enormous amount of resources that basically were removed from its land forces. So strategy is not something that I would just take for granted. And the other is the operational capabilities, which is not, Mauro spoke correctly about the experience, but the same applies when you employ weapon systems. A recurrent theme is that the PLA is growing, the PLA is modernizing, but how strong is the PLA? And there is little experience in terms of actual fighting, and I'm not encouraging or welcoming a fight, but it's just as a matter of fact. But also comes when, for instance, when it comes through procurement or for other plans, that is just, it takes time to oil the machinery. So we can move, if we want, to the next question.
Actually, I would use, Andrea, what you just said to answer the third question, which was about the use of electronic warfare and other type of asymmetric warfare. And I would say that makes total sense. That is one of the third question was about whether China should pursue kind of asymmetric tactics or strategies. I mean, I cannot answer that question, but for sure, a key aspect many have pointed out, that trying to engage in a fight or in a competition with the United States in a field in which the US is a clear advantage is going to be extremely, extremely demanding. Now, what is interesting is actually that we observe China investing a lot in this type of peer-to-peer competition. So whether it's right or wrong, time will say, but I would say in general terms, it makes sense to think more asymmetrically.
Let me move to the second round of questions. How close is China's military to catching up catching up to the United States? How many years will it take for Chinese military technology to catch up to US military? That is one. Second is, where would you place China while comparing military technology of China, US, Russia, and Israel? Where is China? Maybe on the top or in second or third. Third is, why has China been refusing to join the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty?
Okay, so on the first question, I would say, how long it will take. I mean, that is extremely difficult to say. It depends on several factors. One factor is also how quickly the US will be able to make new advances. So like in English is so-called the moving goal or the moving post. So if the US doesn't make any additional progress, of course, catching up for China is going to be much easier than another situation in which the US makes tremendous progress. In that case, China is always going to be lagging behind unless it manages to make a major leap forward. So where is China? How long is it going to take? Is very, very difficult. From our research, which we finished in 2018, we knew China was still behind, at least in the aerospace sector. And this leads to the second question, that is, where is China right now? I would say it depends a lot on kind of the specific platform. We cannot generalize. I mean, we see so for example, in the commercial sector, Huawei has made tremendous progress in 5G, is probably now the most advanced company in the world, or if not the most, is definitively one of the most advanced. So when we want to make an assessment, we cannot rely on generalization that China is behind or China is ahead. It goes by sector, and then when we look at the sector, it goes to platform or technology by technology. There are some in which China is significantly behind. So for example, submarines is definitively one. Jet fighters, it's making a lot of progress, but it's still behind, or there is reason it's still behind. Bombers, so China might unveil a long-range stealth strategic bomber this year. We don't know, but that's one of the speculation, that's one of the rumors. We will see how it is when it comes out. As of now, it doesn't have it, so definitively China is behind. And the third, sorry, what was it?
Why has China been refusing to join the Intermediate Range Nuclear Force Treaty?
So let's keep it 1 second on the side. I just wanted to add something to that Mauro added. And basically the consideration is the following, that Mauro correctly pointed out that it depends on the speed of US technological developments, but there is also another factor that is eventually technological revolutions, meaning that what helped Germany catch up with Great Britain was that at that time, the second industrial revolution made transformed the way we produced weapon systems, changed dramatically from sailing wooden ships. We moved to iron and then steel warships propelled by steam engines. And this transition enabled Germany to catch up. So the question is, in the near future, when the issues of artificial intelligence, quantum computing, 3D printing, new materials, and so forth, whether these will basically make the catching up easier or not. And that's an open question. So to go to the question about the INF treaty, that's, I mean, the simple answer is that we don't know beside the public statements. And to be honest, I don't know precisely what is China's official position. I suspect strategically, the INF has important strategic implication on the East Asian military balance, and I suspect that they consider it that would be to their advantage, the disadvantage.
Okay, let us move to the next round of questions. How prepared is China today in terms of capabilities to fight with the US if there is any possible conflict? Second is, what advantages does the US have at the moment over the PLA? heard is, what are your takes on emerging military technologies? What are the one that holds much significance in these current times?
Can you repeat, sorry, the first? Sorry.
The first is, how prepared is China for any kind of possible conflict with the US? Can China really
so the
United States?
Yeah, so the first and the second are very close.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to say. Speaking about conjecture, it depends also the type of conflict. So there are a bunch of simulations. So if a conflict is going to rise over Taiwan, is a very different conflict than a more large-scale conflict. So there is a very famous report by the Rand Corporation. It's called China's Scorecard from 2017. And what this report was suggesting is that because of just geographic factors, namely the proximity that the China benefits from, and the kind of the more limited presence in the area by the US, China would be able to pose significant problems for the US. How? Because it would be able to strike US bases in the area with long-range missiles, and then it would be able to ensure much quicker supplies and so forth. So that it depends, but that would be, my answer would go in that direction. This leads to the second question about what is the advantage of the US right now. I would say is actually a lot of experience. So the US has been developing and employing, as my brother was saying just a few minutes ago, the US has been employing these technologies for a long, long time. And just as Clausewitz famously say, in war, everything can become extremely difficult. And so just the planning, the logistics, the communications, these entail a lot of planning. And anyone who is interested in reading, for example, all the reports of the first Gulf War or the war in Yugoslavia can see how this experience is fundamentally important. So the shooting down of the F-117, the stealth aircraft over Yugoslavia, took place mostly because of mistakes in planning by the US. So these extremely small mistakes can lead to dramatic consequences. And Andrea, do you want to answer the third? Or?
But I would, before going to the emerging technologies, I would add something to this. That, I mean, the US has an advantage in terms of pre-deployed troops in the area, which we should not neglect or forget about, mostly because if you know the geography of the East Asia, basically, as of now, what open sources say to us is that the US is basically, so for the Chinese Navy, it's very hard to go beyond the second island chain. And these matters because basically the questions about deterrence and retaliation are much harder for China. The entire debate about anti-access era denial capabilities about creating an area from which the US are excluded, and so that protects the Chinese mainland. But because of a set of assets deployed as well as the wide American military capabilities in the area, this is not easy to be made. There is a famous article written by Professor Stephen Biddle of Columbia, which Mauro mentioned before, with Ivan Ehrlich from the Institute of Defense Analysis in 2016, which is called Future Warfare, which points at some of those trends. And the assessment is that until 2047 for them, mostly the second island chain is protected, and that's a main advantage. This brings us to, in a way, to the third question about emerging technologies, on which we are focused to a certain extent. I will make three considerations. So probably the pace of technological change we're seeing right now is really unprecedented. And so for this reason, it's not easy to make good predictions because we don't know where things are going. Some domains have seen really dramatic performance improvements. Machine learning is one. Quantum computing is another, but probably is a bit slower. 5G communication are another one. But the future conflict and victory and defeat in war will depend not only about the technological performance of these technologies, but how they are integrated together into military platforms and how those military platforms are effectively employed. And the three things are disconnected. A country can have the best software, but then not be able to understand how to integrate that software into a military platform. And the pilot or the onboard crew, not even with the best platform ever, not just use it in the most efficient or effective way in combat. I don't know if Mauro, you want to add something to this?
No, that's
okay.
the answer.
Let's move to the next round of question. The guidelines that the PLA ground forces, sorry, I think that is repetition of the question. First is like China displayed their hypersonic weapons during the military parade in October 2019. So my question is, how powerful or dangerous are those weapons? Which country poses that apart from China? And is it really a deterrence from China? Second is, yesterday India imported 5 Rafale fighter jets from France. You might be aware of recent border standoff between India and China. So the question is, how powerful is Rafale and can it really deter China during conflict? Can India really use it to fight with Chinese? Third question is, how should US perceive China's increasing powerful submarine fleet? In America's greatest advantage against China is slowly eroding. Why has Chinese Navy been growing faster than any other major fleet? Does it seek to rule the waves in 3 seas, the South China Sea, East China Sea, and Yellow Sea?
Okay. Sorry.
So,
what was the first question?
Hypersonics.
Oh.
So hypersonics is actually, I didn't mention in the previous question, but we have a set of very competent and qualified participants, I understand, so that which raise one of the other important realms of emerging technologies. So hypersonics is an interesting domain, if we want, because the US Department of Defense just last June cut the funding to hypersonic. We don't know, at least I don't know personally, the reason why. Hypersonics weapons have a key advantage, which is combining in a way the capabilities of cruise missiles with the capabilities of ballistic missiles exponentially, because with the extremely short reaction times, they basically make anti-air defenses much more vulnerable, and at the same time give very little reaction time to those who are being eventually targeted or attacked.
Andrea, can I just say, because for those who don't know, I just want to explain, the basic idea is like a ballistic missile follows a ballistic trajectory. Therefore, after they reach a given altitude, they can be identified by over-the-horizon radars, right? So they go and like the problem of ballistic missiles is that they reach such a high speed that there is a very short time to detect it. But then the window in which they can be detected is fairly large because of the ballistic trajectory. Conversely, hypersonic weapon systems, hypersonic missiles can fly on a straight path at a very low altitude. So this means that they still go extremely fast. So they they have a very short, they give the defending countries very short reaction time. But because they fly in a low altitude, they don't have such a window. So the time in which they can be detected is even more reduced in comparison to ballistic missiles.
No, perfect. And so this poses a set of important questions also because clearly you can use hypersonic weapons against the nuclear arsenals, and these may create some risk of escalation or in any case some risk of confrontation. As of now, the countries which have invested the most on hypersonics are the US, China, and Russia, I would say. But it's ambiguous because while scholars and analysts speak of an forthcoming arms race in hypersonics, as of now we have not seen it. So it's difficult to to gauge. There was I don't remember now what the last questions which was there, or the second question.
The second question was like recently India imported yesterday only, like they imported 5 Rafale jets from France, and there is recent border standoff. So can India really use it as a weapon to deter China? Is it a weapon or is it just like waste of money? What is your take on it?
Well, so I mean, so let's connect it to our research that we presented earlier on. What we said is that over the past 150 years, the complexity of military technology has grown so much that producing extremely advanced weapon systems has become harder and harder. How do we, what is the evidence or some anecdotal evidence supporting this claim? If we look at 1920 or 1930, the number of countries producing aircraft was relatively large. Most industrialized countries could produce military aircraft. If we look right now, the countries able to indigenously produce advanced military aircraft is much lower. And if we think there are not many, and it mostly is the United States, Russia, China, and we discussed the problems of China. And one of them is actually France. France has taken a peculiar path in contrast to its European and NATO allies. It's not only recently with the next generation fighter will cooperate with Germany, but the Rafale is indigenously developed. So it's all French technology. That is pretty impressive because managing to produce all those technologies domestically is very difficult. The Rafale is definitely one of the most advanced fourth and a half generation fighters. And in fact, in different training and exercises, it shows tremendous capabilities. Now, I'm not updated about the order that India placed several years ago to France. I remember it was something like 130, 136 Rafales. That I remember it was for a moment halted and then it started again. With 5 aircraft, you basically don't even have a squadron. So some of them may be needed for maintenance, some of them aircraft are needed also for training. But as India is building up its fleet of Rafales, it definitely provides it with some, if not the most advanced jet fighter capabilities in the area.
I would add one point on this one, like consider that China recently, a couple of years ago, bought a couple more Russian aircraft, which suggests, or at least gives reason to believe that China still, even in the 4th generation aircraft or in the 4th++ generation aircraft, China has not been able to catch up with Russia. Now, the key question becomes which country is more advanced between Russia and France. It becomes a matter of subjective views, but these might help the person who asked the question.
Well, yeah, I'm not sure it's a matter of subjective view, meaning that we know that French technology is really advanced, and especially even
I wanted to be diplomatic, but yeah.
So France is some of the, in some domains, especially aerospace, is some of the most advanced technologies and technology companies in the world, on par or just after the United States. And so, and then there was the third question, sorry, because the
third question was like, how should US perceive China's increasing powerful submarine fleet? In America's greatest advantage, like China is trying to develop its submarine. Last 7 years, there is massive increase in military capabilities in sea of China. So how do you look at it?
Submarine, right?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. So of course, submarine plays a key role in modern warfare, first and foremost for nuclear deterrence. As of now, my understanding is that China's ballistic missile submarines actually are not on a patrol generally, but the key way for the US to counter China's advances in submarine technology is actually by investing even more in anti-submarine warfare, which means the so-called, like the US already some 25, 30 years ago developed low frequency active acoustics sonar on the Surtras class. This is like provides additional capabilities to so-called passive sonar for detection. The US also started putting some anchored sonars at the bottom of the oceans in key strategic points to enhance further the capabilities of detecting Chinese submarine. So bottom line is clearly massive investments and practices in anti-submarine warfare is the most intuitive way to go.
You know, I just would add something. As Mauro mentioned, so we know that Chinese submarines are relatively noisy, much noisier than their American counterparts. But even let's assume that Chinese submarines are exactly as those of the United States in terms of, so when they are the propeller, and other signals and noise that it emits. Well, but as implied, how you detect submarines, mostly through noise. But if one member of the crew on the submarine just makes some very simple mistakes, you have to repair something and you hit a hammer in the wrong way. This just generates so much noise that can be easily detected. I don't have more information about these because all the information about anti-submarine warfare are classified. But think about how many people are in submarine and the little mistakes that you can make and that generate noise, and that and this noise can be detected hundreds of miles away. So even if you have a perfect technology, some crewmanship, so problems with personnel may just undermine your own fleet force structure.
Let's go to other round of questions. How strategically capable is the third generation submarine launched missile called the Lu-Jiang 3, which is called Giant Wave, going to be? What implication does it have towards US and the world? Second is, why are submarines considered the most survivable nuclear deterrence platform? And third is, what are the possible chances of the contenders of United States to imitate its most advanced weapon system and take over its military dominance?
Okay, I'll go with the first together since they are very close. So about submarines. So first, why are they considered the most survivable leg of the so-called nuclear triad? So in comparison to land-based ballistic missiles, as well as to nuclear bombers. So submarines have a key advantage that water, the oceans, are impermeable to most sensors. That is visual sensors, obviously, but also radar, thermal sensor, infrared thermal sensors. They can penetrate the water only to up to 5-10 meters. And after that, they lose most of their capacity, which means that submarines, but just hiding underwater, they are essentially impossible to be detected by these visual or radar sensors. They are observable, they can be detected by noise, as my brother was saying. Why? Because in the ocean, the noise travels under specific circumstances for possibly extremely long ranges. So this allows for the detection of submarines. So submarines have this key advantage in comparison to land-based ballistic missiles and to bombers, that they are much more difficult to detect. These lead to the first question: what is the advantage of the new ballistic missile submarine class of China? Well, if this class will happen to have the capabilities Sam described, that is, they are much quieter, that is, they produce much lower noise, well, this class will be much more difficult to be detected. Noise, we can go, if someone is interested, I can go in detail the sources of noise for submarines, but if this class is much more difficult to be detected, then it means that China will have a fairly credible and therefore a fairly effective underwater nuclear deterrent. Then the third question, Andrea, do you want to?
So can I have again the third question?
Like, what are the possible chances of the contenders of United States to imitate its most advanced weapon system and take over its military dominance? Like, is it possible that China can copy US and become more powerful than United States?
I mean, everything is possible. The question is always about timing. And if we look at the short time, this is possible, but is not plausible. In the long term, this is possible also because we don't know what the United States will do in 20, 30, or 50 years ahead. No, I mean, in our research, we pointed to a special material that's called Folk Bank that was used in American nuclear warheads. And what happened was that the US Navy basically stopped developing this material, and then all the people who worked on that product retired or left the organization. And when a few years later, the US Navy tried to develop again that material, it struggled tremendously. What it means is that if tomorrow the United States cuts dramatically its defense spending and all people working in the defense industrial base just go doing something else, okay, then it's much easier to catch up. But if the United States continues to maintain high level of research and investments, high level of procurement, is just much harder to catch up. Obviously, not all countries have the same chances, meaning that a country like China, just because of the sheer amount of resources that is investing in defense, has higher chances, and also because China has young engineers, is investing a lot of resources in science and technology more in general. It's just higher chances that, for instance, a country like Russia, whose industrial base more in general is progressively shrinking, and it's is not really investing much resources in research and development. A caveat that I pointed before, that we live in an age of unprecedented technological change. This means also that some technologies are emerging a bit like mushrooms around the world. And so it's not impossible that in some specific domains, some countries will be, for some time at least, ahead of other in military technology. I give you an example from the past few years, that is drones, that is a domain in which Israel has been the leader for a long time. Then when the United States started investing in drones, buying more drones, probably caught up. It's difficult to exactly say who is first, but Israel was definitely ahead. And we cannot rule out that in some specific domain, something similar may happen in the near future.
Okay, let's move to other round of question. A top Chinese science institute recently made record-breaking progress in the scramjet program and speculated to lead to scientific advances in the development of China's hypersonic cruise missiles. What sort of leap will China take in terms of its military technology in near future with such advances? Second, China currently has 2 carriers and a third in a shipyard, with a 4th planned. But what is the Chinese aircraft carrier program like? How advanced will China's Type 003 and Type 004 aircraft carrier be? Third is, with the rapid military modernization taking place in China, heighten the PLA confidence and make it more willing to risk war. So what's your take on this?
Okay, I'll go with the first 2, and then Andrea, if you want to get the third one. So the scramjet, so we don't know, of course, as always. We haven't explored in depth the scramjet Chinese program. Scramjet, for those who are listening, is a specific type of engine that can yield extremely high speed. However, to achieve such high speed, the missile or the platform needs already to be flying very fast. So therefore, it needs to have something like 2 sources of propulsion. One that first takes the missile or the platform airborne at a very advanced speed, and therefore afterward it can go much faster. If China developed it, the same of what we said earlier for hypersonic weapons would essentially apply. That is, China would have a technology that is much more difficult to detect and therefore also to shut down than ballistic missiles. So the main advantage would be having a technology that can really penetrate with a much higher chance of success enemy air defenses, because the time window in which it can be detected is extremely short because of the straight trajectory and because of the speed. On the second question, the Chinese aircraft carrier, so this is another program we actually haven't explored in depth, is actually very interesting. So the first aircraft carrier, as many people by now know, is a former Ukrainian that was bought kind of illegally, was supposed to be transformed in a cruise, in a commercial cruise boat, and then it ended up in Chinese naval yard, and it was refurbished and became the first Chinese aircraft carrier. The second one and the third is very interesting. I don't know that much. It's very interesting. They have some very advanced technology, such as for helping the aircraft take off. So a key aspect of aircraft carrier is that they are relatively short. They provide jet aircraft with a relatively short runway to take off. So they need a technology that boosts the speed of the aircraft such that it can take off. It has enough lift. So Chinese aircraft carrier allegedly have a relatively kind of advanced technology for helping aircraft to take off. However, for other aspects, they seem to be relatively less advanced. For example, propulsion. So the Chinese aircraft carriers have steam turbines. And to give you an idea, I think since the 80s, no countries in the world has ever commissioned a ship propelled by steam turbines. What do they use? Generally, they use either, of course, nuclear reactors or steam or gas turbines. Gas turbines is actually the very same technology of jet engines. So these are gas turbines. So this is insightful, because what we can infer is that the very same problems that China is faced with the jet fighter programs, with the development of jet engines, has also affected its naval shipbuilding program. Namely, China could not develop, we can conjecture, China could not develop a gas turbine that is a jet engines that provide the sufficient propulsion to the ship. Yeah. Andrea, we cannot hear you.
So sorry. So I wanted to add something on the carriers. That is very simply. So why carriers are important? Because if you want to project firepower away from your borders, either you have missiles, but the missiles have some constraints, or you move all your troops, and it may be extremely difficult, or you use aircraft carriers, and that's the key advantage. But the issue of the carriers, in my view, is important because of the question that was raised before about the advantages and disadvantages of China. And the question is, how much, to what extent are carriers the most appropriate platform for the optimal Chinese military strategy? No, and we don't know. I mean, we don't have access to all the information, but it's a question that we need to ask ourselves. Meaning, is it better for China to have 2? Is it better to have 10? Or actually, China should invest something else? Making these calculations is not easy at all, but it's about strategy. It's about turning your strategic principle into operational capabilities. I just wanted to add this because there are growing debates about like the battleships in the early part of the 20th century were exactly superseded by aircraft carriers. Is there a reason in the near future other platforms would replace aircraft carriers? We don't know, but that's consideration to be made. Sorry again, I don't remember the third question. Mauro, I don't know if you...
No, I don't remember either.
Okay, let's move to the next round of question. like Mauro and Andrea has arrived at the conclusion that the number of Chinese defense products are still inferior to the American ones, assuming that the Chinese are trying to create a fighter jet that will have the same role of F-22, like the Germans did in the last century for what concerned battleships. So this is from the audience. So my point is, what if the Chinese are trying to create the same kind of fighter, but just an indigenous product that answers to different issues if compared to the America's 5th generation warplanes? Is it possibly going to mitigate the technological inferiority of China? So this is the question. Second is, what triggered PLA's decision to significantly reduce its military spending in proportion to national GDP and the state budget over the years, but has it increased in absolute value is a question. Third is, does the recently passed US Pacific Deterrence Initiative, PDI 2021, indicate that the game between China and the US in Indo-Pacific will be more heated in future?
Okay, so I can again answer the first two questions. So about the question is whether maybe China is not really trying to copy American technology, it's just trying to develop a platform that provides key advantages such that China can more easily engage US very advanced jet fighter. That's absolutely possible. There are a couple of aspects, however, that raise doubts on these possibilities. So first of all, what we know, actually from one of the most famous blogger on China's defense, who provides different type of information, is that the J-20 actually cannot, so one of the mission many people have pointed out is that the J-20 might be intended to as an interceptor, that is an aircraft intended not to engage necessarily US stealth fighter, but to engage with refuel tankers, that has aircraft that carry fuel and that provides refueling on air, as well as with early warning aircraft, that is aircraft that carry a huge radar, and this radar provides extremely long range detection capabilities, and it provides this information to US jet fighters. And another possible mission is that the J-20 is intended to kind of shoot down specific American ships. Well, what we know, according to this very prominent analyst, is that actually the missile bay of the J-20, as of 1.5 years ago, cannot host missiles with such a long range. So it would not be able to host anti-ship missiles as well as very long range anti-air aircraft. So that already kind of possibly excludes some of the key missions that the J-20 might be intended to perform. Second, another possible option is what the China is trying to do, actually what Russia is trying to do. Namely, Russia is developing the Su-57, is an aircraft that has essentially only frontal limited radar reflections, but not either on the side or on the rear. So why is Russia developing? Because Russia's main approach is to develop something that can get sufficiently close through a mix of technology as well as maneuvering. It gets sufficiently close to American fighters so that in case of need, it can engage them. Well, the problem is that the Chinese aircraft has, with the canards, the forward wings, it actually reduces significantly the possibility of maneuvering and maintain some limited stealth capabilities. And therefore, and because of the problem of Chinese engines that have very little, that they don't achieve sufficient thrust and therefore cannot allow for significant maneuvering, this means that China would actually not be able, or is much more difficult, that China would be able to employ the tactics Russia has devised. So on that, this question is absolutely correct, is absolutely possible. The information we have suggests that, well, this is really happening, actually. The second question, Andrea, do you remember what it was?
Can I add only something to this? Sure. That is the following. All what you're saying points to make basically technological calculations that in order to better suit your own strategy. And this comes with experience. I mean, understanding exactly the type of platform and the type of performance that you need to maximize, you need to have equipment technicians, not only strategists that understand so well the technology, so well your own capabilities, as well as the enemy or adversary's capabilities, that you know where can basically you can pierce a hole. And only these, while it's easy to discuss, is much, much more difficult to put in practice. No, I don't know.
Sorry?
Please continue. There are some disturbance.
Yeah, so if you can point out the second and third question.
The second question was like, what triggered PLA's decision to significantly reduce the military spending in proportion to national GDP?
So I mean, I think I don't think there has been a significant decrease. There has been like the increase in spending has not kept pace with what we have seen over the past 20 years. I tend to believe is to a large degree actually that the Chinese economy has started losing steam. So, but as far as I understand, the military spending has kept increasing even over the past few years. It's just that the pace of increase has decreased, like has slowed down. So the second derivative has flattened. So that's my understanding. And what was the third?
And third question was, does the recently passed US Pacific Deterrence Initiative, PDI 2021, indicate that the game between China and the US in Indo-Pacific will be more heated in future?
Andrea, do you have an answer to this?
No, to be honest, I mean, what we know from public documents is that definitely has been labeled great powers competition, and that for a set of reasons, the competition between the United States and China is going to increase, not only militarily, probably also diplomatically, also technologically. The 5G issue is one, but besides that, I'm not sure I can add much to that.
Okay, let me go to the last two questions because we're running out of time. It's almost like we just have 2 more minutes. The US Army claims to have overarching concept for how it wanted to use 3D printing and substantive manufacturing in coming days. How do you see the future of military applications of 3D printing, and what will be the process of bringing the capabilities into the field? And last question is, how do you view the broader global trend towards investing in new strategic nuclear weapons?
Okay. I go with 3D printing. So yeah, absolutely, very, very specific question. So 3D printing, which is so-called additive manufacturing, meaning that we add layers over layers through a printer that inject a given material until we create the artifact we desire. So 3D printing, of course, has massive potential. As of now, however, it also has a lot of limitations. And this limitation comes down mostly to the materials that can be printed. So when it comes to relatively simple components of materials which do not need to withstand extremely demanding conditions, whether heat, fatigue resistance, mechanical stresses, whatsoever. So 3D printing is extremely effective. This is why a lot of companies have started employing it, because it cuts down terms like the time between someone realizing needed a component and when you receive it from a supplier. However, when it comes to the most demanding components or parts of weapon systems, 3D printing as of now is still not an option. Why? Because, for example, the turbine blade of jet engines needs to operate in the compressor in the in the hot section of a compressor of a jet engine, which reaches temperature that can go up to 2000 Celsius and to mechanical stresses that are equivalent to 20 times the force of gravity. So you need to develop a component that can resist these conditions, and 3D printing cannot. In fact, the material that can withstand these conditions, so-called nickel-based superalloys, single crystal blades, go through an extremely lengthy and multi-step procedure at which each single step modifies the chemical structure of the material until it yields the properties we desire. 3D printing simply cannot do that. So absolutely a lot of potential, but also limitations.
There was the second question was about nuclear weapons.
What about nuclear weapons?
It was probably about nuclear modernization, if I understood correctly.
Like how do you view the global, broader global trend towards investing in new strategic nuclear weapons?
Difficult question. Actually, I don't have a specific idea. I think, I mean, what we have seen over the past 10, 15 years is that quite some countries have started investing in submarines that can carry nuclear weapons. So Israel and Pakistan, they have submarines that carry cruise missiles that mount, in case of Israel, allegedly, nuclear weapons. Same thing, North Korea has refurbished all Soviet submarines to develop a ballistic missile submarine. So for sure, it's evident that some countries have opted for this platform because, as one of the other attendant pointed out earlier, submarines are the most survivable technology. So we might expect that other countries go in this direction. For other technologies, sorry?
No, well, the research from Daryl Press from Dartmouth College and Keir Lieber from Georgetown University suggests that we are entering a new era of counterforce. Basically, improvements in accuracy and improvements in sensing are basically making second strike capabilities increasingly vulnerable. And this has a set of wide implications, including that nuclear reductions, if Press and Lieber are right, may actually be counterproductive, because already counterforces are going to potentially neutralize a good chunk of a country's strategic nuclear arsenals. So that's one of the claims. The other one is probably about the importance of space, because space-based assets, especially for early warning and control, are increasingly important, and so they can become they are vulnerable, and the question is whether a cyber, electromagnetic, or kinetic attack against a satellite actually triggers a nuclear escalation, because obviously if you take down an early warning and control center, the next step is that you're probably going to launch an attack preventing your adversary to see it.
Dr. Mauro Gilli and Dr. Andrea Gilli, thank you very much for your time and enlightening presentation. The discussion was really interesting. We learned a lot, and I'm sure our participants also benefited immensely from it. Thank you very much once again. We hope to meet you in real in days to come when things get normalized. We also like to thank all our participants for their wonderful question. Thank you very much, and have a nice day.